All right, everyone, on this episode, we're gonna get in out of the cold and get ready for next season by preparing our seed starting mix in order to get all of our vegetables, herbs, and flowers off to a great start. Hey everyone, it's Phil from Earth, Nails, and Tails, and on today's episode, we're gonna be getting into creating a seed starting mix. So everything that you see here is gonna be incorporated into our seed starting mix in some way, shape, or form. I want to talk to you guys about the science behind all of these materials, and then at the end of the video we're going to be getting into my recipe, the proportions, and how I put all of these things together. So if you're only interested in the recipe, which I can understand, we all don't have time for absorbing new information, so if you just want to look at the recipe, I'll make sure I put a link in the description below to the recipe itself. So if you want to just get that, you can click that and that'll take you right there. But if you want to learn a little bit more about soil science, stick around for this first portion of the video, because I'm going to describe to you each one of these things individually and why it's important for your seedlings. All right, so the three main ingredients for our seed starting mix, and most seed starting mixes that you'll see from the big box stores if you were to actually read the ingredients, are compost, vermiculite, and peat moss. So compost is really great for your seed starting mixes because it does a few things. It increases the soil structure of the material that you're planting your plants in, and it also provides some beneficial microorganisms as well as a very small amount of nutrition, enough where it's not overstimulating your plants, and it's also going to help them with their growth further down their development. Peat moss is really great for your seed starting mix because it's nice and light and fluffy, and then another fantastic property that it has, the ability to absorb multiple times its weight in water. So what that does, it basically prevents you from either over or under watering. If you overwater it, that peat moss is going to absorb a lot of that water, and then as the vegetables or the plants or the herbs require more water, it's going to suck it out of that peat moss, and that peat moss is going to become more dry. So it's really, really great at maintaining the moisture of your seedlings, which is really important. And then lastly, we have our vermiculite, and what it does is similar to peat moss, but it does a little bit differently. It's a very porous material, and it actually absorbs water and nutrients from the soil. So if you were to overwater or provide your soil with a little bit too much nutrition, your vermiculite will absorb a lot that mixture, and then similar to peat moss, provide it to the plants as they suck up the water. So it has great moisture and nutrient retaining properties. Some of the other ingredients I have here, which are pretty much additions, I'm going to show you guys how to make the basic mixture, and then I'm also going to be adding in these amendments as well, and I'm going to explain to you why they're important right now. So I have biochar. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may have not, and that's okay. If you didn't hear of it, it's a great amendment to add into your soil, and I'm going to get into it in a minute. We have some all-purpose fertilizer from Dr. Earth's, which I love. It's one of my favorite fertilizing companies. The other one that I like is Down to Earth, and you'll probably see me using those most of the time in a lot of my videos and throughout my garden. This one's even more special because it has beneficial fungi and bacteria mixed into it, which is imperative to the soil health and helping your plants get off to a good start. And then lastly, we have some azomite, which is basically volcanic rocks pulverized into a fine powder, and it's full of your micronutrients. And azomite is actually a play on words. It's basically minerals available from A to Z. It's actually a trademark word. So that's what that means. So if you've ever heard of azomite, it literally means just a trace amounts of elements across the spectrum, literally from A to Z. So it's really good to mix into your potting mixes as well as into your garden beds. So the reason why biochar is great is because it takes charcoal, and then you take the beneficial microbes that are available, like we have in our fertilizer here, and it injects them into all of the pores that exist in charcoal. And most of you know that charcoal is used in your filters, your water filters in your homes and your fridges. And the reason why they're used for filters is because there are thousands, hundreds, millions of holes inside of this charcoal. And all of those holes will actually capture all of the impurities that are in your water. So instead of using it as a filter to filter out impurities, we're using those holes to capture all of the beneficial bacteria and fungi that we want to add into our soil. So all of the millions, thousands, however many holes are inside of this charcoal is holding that much beneficial bacteria, which we're just going to inject into our soil. And this beneficial bacteria and fungi is really important for our soil health and therefore the creation or the health of our plants. When we are creating our soil mixes, or when we're growing a vegetable garden or any other garden, we're actually growing or creating the environment that's beneficial for our plants. And our plants actually get their nutrition from the beneficial bacteria and microbes that live in the soil. So without having a healthy environment for our microbes to live in, our plants will not thrive. So whenever you're inoculating your soil with a beneficial microbe, you want to make sure that you're giving a variety, or you're putting in a variety into your soil. Not every vegetable, not every plant likes the same microbes. So different plants and vegetables are going to feed different microbes to their benefit. It's a symbiotic relationship. So when I plant a tomato versus a broccoli plant, those two different plants may like different microbes. And they're going to provide specific nutrients. They're going to put nutrients into the soil that specific microbes like, which is going to attract those microbes, and then those microbes are going to give the nutrients that are required for that plant to grow back to the plant. So it is very much a symbiotic relationship. And this is why we want to incorporate a variety of microbes into our soil, so that way we know that the relationship between the plant and the microbes is going to exist. All right, so since we had a pretty extensive conversation on the biochar, on the beneficial organisms that exist in it, those same organisms or similar organisms are going to be present in this Dr. Earth's organic and natural all-purpose fertilizer. So those same microbes are going to be in here, so that's going to benefit our soil even more, get our vegetables off to a great start. But I just want to mention that I do like to put some all-purpose fertilizer into my seed starting mix, because it does give those seedlings the extra boost that they need after they've begun germinating. So for those of you that don't know, the seed itself has a majority of the nutrients that the plant needs in order to germinate, then grow for the first couple weeks of its life. So it actually doesn't need nutrition for about the first couple weeks from external sources, right? The plant isn't able to extract nutrition from the soil until it has leaves and until its roots grow. And it really takes that long for the plant to establish into the soil. So from that week to 2 week on point is when the plant wants access to some fertilizer or some plant food. So this is a very light fertilizer, a 2-2-2. So we're not going to overstimulate the growth of the plant. We're going to give it enough to establish really, really well and then start to grow. And then lastly but not least, we have our worm castings. So worm castings are excellent. They're basically an amped up version of compost. When you're making compost, most of the time, when the compost pile cools down, if you're making a hot compost pile, those larger microorganisms, such as worms, will come in and they'll finish up the process of breaking all those materials down. So those worms are eating all of the materials that are in the compost, and then worm castings is basically the poop, the excretion of or from the worm. So as you can imagine, everything in there is going to be supercharged with nutrition. So what worm castings does, and if you look at this here, it breaks down, it's very fine. So it's going to provide excellent structure to the soil, and it's also going to provide a little bit of nutrition for your mix as well. So this is a great addition into your seed starting mix. I use this in my garden as well. All right, so now that we've gone over the science behind all of these ingredients, why they're important, we're gonna get into the recipe that you've all been waiting for. So what I like to do is use a tote, a plastic tote of some sort, in order to get everything all mixed together in the proper proportions. Now, I'm gonna be using this large tote because I'm gonna be making seed starting mix for a few hundred plants. So I know that's a lot more than most people are doing, which is why I'm using this, so you guys can use a smaller tote if necessary. And as you can see, I have my Home Depot buckets here. This Home Depot bucket is gonna be basically my measuring cup. You guys can break it down to any way to make smaller amounts as necessary, so don't get freaked out. I'm only gonna be using this. I'm still gonna tell you the ratio so that way you can use a different measuring spoon if you choose to. All right, so as I said earlier, the three main ingredients in my seed starting mix are gonna be compost, peat moss, and vermiculite. And what you wanna do is basically mix these in a 1 part compost, 1 part peat moss, and then 1/2 part vermiculite. So how we're gonna do that is basically fill this bucket up 1 time with compost, 1 time with peat moss, and then we're gonna fill half the bucket up with vermiculite, and that's gonna make our basic seed starting mix. Now, you guys don't have to add the biochar, the fertilizer, the azomite, the worm castings. All of those are just going to further promote, benefit the seed starting mix and give those plants an even better start. You guys don't have to add these things, but honestly, if you guys want to create or start the best seeds that you possibly can, then I would highly recommend adding these ingredients, because the stronger the plant is from the start, the stronger it is going to be able to thrive, adapt, give you a great harvest out in the garden. So now that you know my basic recipe, I'm going to also tell you how to add in each one of these amendments. So I said about the worm castings. The worm castings are basically a supercharged compost, and because they've already been digested by the worms, those nutrients are even more readily available to those plants. So it basically provides 3 times the value to the soil that compost does. So however much compost I'm gonna put in, 1/3 of that is gonna be worm castings. All right, so for my azomite, what you wanna do is, you don't have to add your azomite in when you're actually creating the mix. You can add it in later if you so choose. And what the manufacturer recommends is adding 1/2 teaspoon per inch diameter of a pot. So let's say you have a 3-inch pot, you're gonna add 3/2, so 3 teaspoons into the mixture, however much is going into that 3-inch pot. For the biochar, that's acting as an inoculant. So my azomite is adding my micronutrients, my biochar is adding my beneficial bacteria. You do not have to add a lot of biochar. I'm gonna be adding the exact same amount of biochar as I am azomite. So 1/2 teaspoon for every pot inch of diameter. All right, and for my balanced fertilizer here, I'm simply just gonna read the instructions on the back and do exactly what it recommends. For potted plants, it's saying to add 1/4 cup per 1/2 cubic foot, and 1/2 cubic foot is approximately 5 gallons. Well, it turns out that my measuring cup here, or my Home Depot bucket, is 5 gallons. So this is great, makes the math very simple. So since we're using 1 bucket of manure or compost, 1 bucket of peat moss, and 1/2 bucket of vermiculite, we're basically gonna have 2.5 servings. So 2 servings of 1/4 cup is 1/2 cup, and then 1/2 serving of 1/4 cup would be 1/8 of a cup. So that's how much of this we're gonna be adding into our mix. So now that we have a good understanding of all of the ingredients, let's get started mixing. So I'm gonna be making 4 times the amount in order to create enough seed starting mix for all of my plants. So when you're creating your mixture, I recommend doing it in smaller batches and making sure that you're mixing everything really well. So I'm just gonna start off with my peat moss here. And if you guys do a little bit more or a little bit less than I recommended, it's not a big deal. This doesn't have to be an exact science, but you just wanna get pretty close. So there's my 1 bucket full of peat moss. Now we're gonna do an equal part compost. So there's our equal part compost. And as you can see, this, since it's in bags, this compost can be a little bit chunky, so you gotta make sure that you break these down really well, all right? And then we're gonna add our vermiculite. So we're gonna do half a bucket. And you guys could probably see with the shadow here, about halfway. Let's get that in there. So there's 1 serving of this mixture. And now we're just gonna get our hands in there and mix it around really, really, really good. So, now that we got everything mixed together, here's what our final mixture looks like. Super light and fluffy. You guys can see the vermiculite in there. So this is gonna make our plants super, super happy. And if you guys wanna see how the seedlings turn out, I did a video last year for 5 tips on how to start your seedlings. So that way you guys could see how things started, but don't worry, this year I'm also gonna be putting out some videos as well. So you'll be able to see how everything is progressing. So now I just need to repeat this process about 3 more times. And then I'll show you how I add in the biochar and all of that stuff. Castings. We're gonna, however much compost we add, we're gonna add 1/3 of it. So this is not as much as I would like to put in, but I can always add some later. Unfortunately, I ran out, but if you want to know where to get it, if you go on our website, earthnailsandtails.com, and go to our shops page, we have a products we love page, and everything that I use is gonna be listed there. So since I'm doing the 4 times mixture, it's about 2.5 cups of biochar and 2.5 cups of azomite. And it turns out that a solo cup is actually 2.5 cups, so it's really easy for my total large recipe. So I'm just gonna do 1 scoop. So as you can see, like, look how much of this material I have, and this is all of the biochar that I'm adding to this. This is all that you need for all of this mixture. And then I'm gonna do the exact same thing with the azomite. And as I said, this is basically a powdered volcanic rock dust. So this is what it looks like here. We're just gonna add that in there as well. Again, this is a bunch of trace minerals. And then lastly, we're gonna add our fertilizer. Since we have 6 cubic feet, and it's 1/4 cup per half a cubic foot. So we're gonna have 6 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so everything is now added into our mix. And just like we did before, we want to incorporate this well. And as you can see, with all of this material, it's going to be a lot harder to mix together. So I highly recommend making the smaller batches, which is why I use my Home Depot bucket as a measuring cup. It just makes things so much easier in the long run. All right, everyone, so after a lot of digging and mixing, here is our final product. A very nice, light, fluffy, nutrient-rich, microbial life-rich potting mix that your plants are gonna absolutely love. All of your vegetables, all of your flowers, all of your herbs are gonna thrive in this stuff. And I just wanted to say one last thing, that the seed starting mix is a little bit different than our normal garden soil. It's a lot fluffier, it's a lot lighter. It has a little bit better moisture retention properties, unless you have amazing soil that you've been building for years and years and years. And we want to make our seed starting mix a little bit lighter on purpose. We want to make the plants have no issues whatsoever digging deep into this mixture and establishing themselves really, really well. The stronger the root system of the plants are, the stronger the plants are going to be overall. Because as I said and how I discussed earlier, the roots are the way that the plant gets access to the nutrition from the microbes. So if the plants have a more extensive and healthier root system, they're going to have more readily available or better access to all of the nutrients, micro and macronutrients that they need in order to survive and produce amazing, amazing harvests. And that's gonna be it for this episode of Earth, Nails, and Tails. So I really hope you all enjoyed this video today. You learned something. And if you did, please like, subscribe, share. It's free for you guys to do these things, and it helps us get traction. It lets me know that you guys are getting something out of this material. And I really hope that this helped continue to grow the gardener in you. My name's Phil. I hope you guys enjoyed.